This is my desk chair. I've been using it as my office chair for about 20 years now, and despite me making this half-assed purple corduroy cover for it about a decade ago, it's looking pretty nasty and worn out now. It's a pretty unconventional office chair, and that's because at a point before it was my desk chair, it was the driving seat in the souped-up Ford Anglia my dad had when my brother and I were babies. So aside from the fact that I've always found it pretty comfortable as a desk chair, the personal historic value made reupholstering it a much more attractive proposition than replacing it with a more conventional office chair. The cover I made for it a decade ago was basically just a slipcover. I did it in corduroy so as to be hard wearing, but I always wanted the ribs to be chunkier, which I have since learned is a unit of measure for corduroy called whale. So I ordered a few samples to start my new upholstery project. I ordered some in purple, which proved to be the right shade of purple, but for some reason I wasn't really convinced by it. I also ordered this natty teal for an unconventional alternative to the purple, and I got a more tame sample of a dark brown too. Of the three, I was surprised that I liked the brown the best, but it was a bit too dark for my tastes. So dark that Lily thought it was black. I thought something more chocolatey would look nicer, so I ordered a sample of a different shade of brown from another shop. When it showed up, it wasn't exactly chocolatey, but whatever it was, it spoke to me, and it said, "Old car." It was probably a bit more Rover 2000 than Anglia V8, but that seemed like rather a good thing to me somehow. So with a positive idea for the fabric, I had to work out how much I needed. I wanted to do a bit more of a comprehensive job of reupholstering it than the slipcover I made before, and that meant the breaking of the eggs before omeleting. So I set about dismantling the chair. My purple cover was mostly held together with duct tape, so getting that off was pretty straightforward. But when I got down to the remains of the original black fabric upholstery, I found it was all attached with these little metal hoops. I started trying to bend them apart, which worked, but it was much fiddlier than it seemed like it should have been. I decided it made more sense in the moment to just scalpel the fabric away from the hoops, as the fabric was going away anyway. I found a sweet wrapper in the depths of the chair when I was taking it apart, and going by its design, it dates back about 35 years itself, which is fun. Once I got all the hoops detached, I could start peeling off the black fabric. I began exposing some pretty intense intra-decade crapé within, which Frisbee wasn't very happy about me cleaning up. Gross. Now I was inside, I was pretty bemused to see what amounted to the backrest was just a panel of 5mm plywood. I'd finally stripped it back to its cushioning, and Frisbee decided to do her best cat impression on it.
Frizz.
At this point I decided it would be prudent to get at least half a clue about what I was doing, so I started searching for videos about car upholstery. I found several very helpful videos from this guy, who I assume is called Rudolph based on the poster behind him. I learned two particularly helpful things from him. One was that the thinner foam that I needed to replace with my upholstery was called scrim, and the other was that my project didn't look nearly as complicated as most car seats, which was a relief. I told my dad that I was embarking on this project. It used to be his car seat after all, and he imparted some useful knowledge upon me as well. He told me this was a bucket seat made by Cobra, so I looked them up and discovered that not only does the company still exist, but they still make these seats, and they really are a classic. So even having that information was really helpful because it gave me a photo of one that was in factory condition that I could reference. Learning that it was a Cobra seat also led me to this video of a stylish mini restoration that featured a remarkably useful 70-second sequence of their custom upholstery being done at the Cobra factory itself on a similar style seat. In this video I caught a glimpse of my funny ring things being applied by a pair of pliers. And so after a few iterations of Google searches, I learned they're called hog ring pliers. So I ordered myself some. Now I had a bit of an idea of what I was doing, I set about partially unpicking the original upholstery to give me an idea of how much fabric I needed to order. I decided that 2 meters was plenty of fabric and ordered that and some other supplies for the job. I've recently been messing with my grand's Bernina sewing machine that I rescued from their house when we had to clear it. So once the fabric all arrived, I got it back out of the loft and left it to acclimate while I went to walk the dog. I got a new bobbin wound up with my thread, and I decided the best place to start on this project would be the seat cushion. I measured up the top of the old cover, which was pretty rectangular, and cut a piece of my new corduroy, followed by a matching piece of scrim. I then went to the Bernina to stitch the stripe details into the top of the cushion and was quickly disappointed. The machine really didn't want to feed the material through with a thick scrim, and I couldn't find an obvious way of adjusting the feed dog to be more aggressive. I decided I didn't have much to lose by jumping backwards a generation, from my grandma's Bernina to the comfort zone of my great-grandma's Singer. I was kind of excited to use the Bernina, but the trusty old Singer ended up being the right answer, as it was willing to feed the 12mm scrim through much more effectively. I was really rather pleased with myself at this point. There's no way I ever would have been able to stitch this so straight without the wail of the corduroy to follow, but it turned out pretty much as well as I could have hoped it would. Next, I made up a little pattern for the sides of the cushion by tracing up the piece I had previously unpicked from the original upholstery, and I cut myself a mirrored pair so I had one for each side. I wish I did this with the other pieces before I unpicked them, but on this one, before I unpicked it, I'd made some marks on both pieces to indicate how it should line up, so I transferred these marks to my new pieces before sewing them together, which seemed to work pretty well. I stitched them from the middle rather than the ends to minimise the chance of them shifting as I sewed, and that ended up working really well for me. And suddenly it was a cushion cover. It's not without its wrinkles and puckers, but I was really pleased with my efforts with this cushion. It was a good taster for the strange emotions of the rest of the project. A mixture of pride that it was working and worrying that I had no idea how I was going to make the next bit work. And an even more confounding mix of trying to convince myself to do the next bit, but also trying not to rush it. The back panel was very similar to the seat cushion, but it also had this extra flap on the back for where it gets stapled to the plywood. I did my best to make sure I sewed it on nice and square, and it seemed to go okay. Next was more pattern making, this time for the inside wings of the chair. I worked out a way to make an efficient use of the fabric while getting the lines of the corduroy to go in the direction I wanted. I also added some thinner scrim behind these panels, with the intention of adding a bit of cushion at the points where the previous upholsteries had failed. I pinned it all together and sewed the first wing successfully, and I was so pleased with myself that I had a complete brain fart, and I forgot to add the scrim on the second side. I wasn't really happy with how unstraight that stitch was anyway, so I sucked it up and I unpicked it all. I repinned it, this time with the scrim included, and got it stitched together much more successfully. It was really starting to resemble the original upholstery now. I had one more pattern piece to make, which was the huge bit that wraps around the back and sides. I decided to cut the pattern in half so it would be symmetrical, which I think I largely got away with on account of having the stripes in the corduroy to use as my mirror line. I got it all cut out. Then once again I had to pluck up the courage to stitch it all together. I'd done really well so far, but I didn't want to rush it and make some kind of show-stopping mistake that ruined it all. I trimmed a bit of the excess fabric off before I sat myself back down at the wheel of the Singer to stitch these pieces together. It went okay. It was quite hard to keep this sandwich of fabrics all together. I did drift a couple of times where I had to stop and unpick a few stitches before starting it up again. With it all sewed up, I turned it the right way out, and it looked alright. So I popped down to the workshop to grab my staple gun, so I could put a couple of staples in it for a test fit. The fit proved that it was shockingly in the realm of acceptability, so I inverted it again and trimmed some more of the excess fabric before fitting it again. I trimmed the excess on the seat cushion too, which helped me make it look a lot tidier. I went back and looked at my earlier videos to see how it was originally attached to the seat cushion, and I saw that it was just glued, so I decided I wasn't too proud to try and attach it with some duct tape. This all worked really well for about half an hour. The cushion had started out looking much more like its correct shape, but the tape just slipped off while I was working on the rest of the seat. I decided that the rest of the seat was good enough for me to have a go at these hog rings, which meant that I had to remove the old ones. It turns out that all that fiddling I was going through when I was taking the chair apart was completely in vain, as I found that with most of them they could just be twisted straight off with one pair of pliers. And so putting new hog rings in was another I don't want to ruin this good work I've done so far hump to get over. But putting them in around the bottom of the chair was amazing. It was way easier than I thought, and it allowed me to get some tension in the right places to make the upholstery follow the right shapes of the chair.
What do you think, Frisbee?
The solution I came up with to the failing duct tape on the seat cushion was to sew a couple of wings onto the sides, then stitch some Velcro to the wings to hold it with the right tension. This also ended up working about as well as I could have hoped. It got enough tension on the seat cushion to give it the right shape, and it's been holding together fine since.
Good. I'm happy with that.
I needed to snip a couple of little relief cuts into the sides of the cushion to get it fitted. There's no way I would have had the faith to do this if I didn't notice that the original pieces had the same cut. But with the snips made, it got the hog ring treatment as well, and the seat's upholstery was now pretty much finished. I figured that as I had gone to such successful efforts to reupholster the chair, I would make a new plate that attached the chair to the legs. It was pretty remarkable that this piece of 12mm MDF had held up for about 20 years, but I wanted to replace it with a slightly less rough sawn panel that also covered up the last couple of gaps underneath the chair. I trimmed down an offcut of a slightly chunkier piece of plywood to the right size, and then I marked up the holes, rounded off the corners, and rounded off the edges as well. I put some filler in this shoddy ply and my shoddy router operation, sanded that all back, and then gave it a quick coat with some black stain. It was a right old fiddle getting the last screw to fit, but it did fit together in the end and was much tidier than the old panel, so the chair was pretty much done.
For all of its puckers and wonkiness and baggy bits, it's clearly the work of an amateur, but I am really pleased with my efforts. I know it's a low bar, but it looks so much better than it did before. The best it's looked in decades even. I think that considering doing this kind of sewing is relatively new to me, I think I've done alright. Now hopefully it will last me another decade to come. Thank you for watching this video.